Welcome to episode 26 of Sullivan Street. I am Eric Vogelsang, where we are going to talk about the official bootleg Face the Promised Land, the rest of the Oneness Tour, and other Counting Crows news and notes. But first, let's say hi to Chris Miggs. Chris, good afternoon.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. This should be a pretty fun show. It's kind of like odds and ends. It's like the wrap up the summer tour, and and then we'll be moving on to the next stage of our podcast, if you were.
Yeah, well, everyone knows you gave me a good excuse. I've been listening to so much like recent Counting Crows. This was a perfect excuse to be like, I'm going to listen to a show from 25 years ago, and just kind of embrace like the fullness of loving Counting Crows.
Yeah, and you reminded me, and we'll mention it in a bit, that it is the 25th anniversary of this recording. We also have two special guests today. First, let's welcome back to the podcast, Zephry. Zephry, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Eric, Chris, and Rich. It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to be back.
And Zephry was on the recording of, I think it was Recovering the Satellites, right? When
Yes.
we did our review of that. Zephry is also an actor, singer, etc. In the LA area, who I met, and very happy to and we met, and we'll talk about it. We met at the most recent concert again as well. And then let's say hi to a new guest on the program, Rich. Rich, how are you?
I'm really well. Excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Rich, we have you on for a main reason, which we'll talk about in a bit. But first, why don't you talk about how you originally became a Crows fan? I know you've been listening to the podcast a bit, and also what keeps you a Crows fan after all these years?
Yeah, I remember, I'm sure like many of you, first seeing that Mr. Jones video on MTV. And I remember being transfixed by it. It was like the music, the lyrics, the visual style, the video. I was like blown away by it. And then my friend Anthony was the first to buy the August album. And then he brought me to the show at the Beacon in 96. And between that, I've just been hooked the whole time and listened to those first two albums in college quite a lot. Just be on while studying those two albums over and over. And then since that, I felt like I've been the Forrest Gump of fans for Counting Crows, because I've been at some of these really memorable shows completely by accident, unplanned. And it's like, are they playing August all the way through tonight? And they are. And Face the Promised Land is another one of those shows. So.
All right, thank you. Yeah, great segue. So for the first half of today's show, we are going to talk about Face the Promised Land, which was an official bootleg released by the band. And the three of you can give your take if you have any. We don't have our historian Jeff on today about how or why they released this. But it was recorded December 2nd, 1999. So just a few, actually you said in the recording, right, that it's been out for a month. The Desert Life album, I think it was actually a couple months though at that point. And then they released it, this bootleg, 6 months later. It was one of two official bootlegs. The other one, by the time we get to Woodstock, which we will talk about at another episode, released on what I laugh called Potato Dog Records, which I don't know if they've released any other albums outside of these two official bootlegs. I mean, my guess about this, and I don't think this was a money-making thing. Chris, I don't
know. They only released it like online in a pretty limited run.
Yeah.
I wasn't following. I've never had a physical copy of this. Obviously, this became a pretty coveted, sort of circulated piece of music that I think in part people felt comfortable sharing because it's still not available on Spotify or anything like that. So it kind of very quickly became, oh shoot, this is one of the things that if you're getting deeper into the Crows, you got to hear by the time we got to Woodstock and Face the Promised Land, because they are pristine sounding recordings of the band at a pretty strong period in their performing arc.
Yeah, and play not just the hits, right? Which I thought was also part of it. I think I'm guessing it was just like a kind of a gift to the fans, like you said. And Crows were famous for allowing at the time recording of bootlegs, trading bootlegs, and like as Rich said off the air, like this was recorded from the soundboard, and let's give it. And I kind of remember it selling for like $12 or $15, maybe plus shipping and handling. I didn't buy it. I was overseas because I'm seeing it was released. What did I say? July 2000. Yeah, I was overseas, and I think by the time I came back, I was like, not available. We'll never get it. And then I have a friend who I mentioned before, Dan Buckler, who used to be really into the Crows at this time, and then he sent me a lot of his leftover. Bootlegs that he doesn't listen to anymore. And he actually sent me the one time in the mail. I thought I'd never a physical copy, but here it is. So
Oh,
Face the
nice.
Promised Land.
Wow.
So even though, by the
In the
way, for
flesh.
those that don't have it, the insert is not much. Like there's no, it doesn't open up or anything. There's nothing, just the track list. But it is still cool to have. The back has one of those weird like where it's like printed, and revert, like hold it up to the mirror kind of thing. Do you have anything, Chris, to also add just about the release of it, or any other trivia about it that you know of?
No, I mean, I will say again. I think it's part of the question of why. I think the Crows have done a great job over the course of their careers of marketing what is unique about them, right? And so stuff like this, where you say, "Hey, you should listen to what we sound like live because that's going to sell you and that's going to
Hmm.
create deeper fans." I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you go back to obviously Across the Wire, which we discussed in great detail, but they've always really been good at that. And I think this is a part of that, right? They were at a point here where less the record company darlings. Maybe they weren't able to go release another live record on on Geffen, but they can go out and they can be like, we're going to make an official bootleg. We're going to get this out. And funnily enough, I'll talk about this when we talk about some of the things that are missing. I don't own Face the Promised Land, but I do own a physical copy of a different bootleg of the same show.
Okay.
Uh, it's called. Well, no, I'll talk about it now. Why not? It's called Black Hat. I bought it at Generation Records, which is in the Village near Washington Square on Sullivan Street. In the basement, so Generation Records is still it's still there. A great record shop and had a lot of bootlegs. Right
Yeah,
when I
I've been
first
there
got
once. Yeah, I saw that.
yeah
Yeah.
when I first got there, maybe it was probably 2000, 2001, they mostly had like the, you know, all these bootlegs at the top, and they had the new ones, right? So they were $45. I think I bought a Guns N' Roses show from Paris in '92 that I later found out was not actually the complete show. It was like missing two songs or something to fit on the discs. But at a certain point in the early aughts, they set up in the basement like a used section, and that's where I'd go because those would be like $5-8 or something. And so if I saw that, I've got a Crow's bootleg from Glastonbury, and I've also got a bootleg of this show that has it's only one CD. Actually doesn't even have the whole that also doesn't have the whole thing. But it does have one song that when we talk about, I think there's a very awesome version of one song that doesn't make Faith the Promised Land. We'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, it's Generation Records. If you're in New York, go hang out in that basement. You know what I also bought down there, Eric? To your
No,
taste, I bought some Smashing Pumpkins bootlegs in that basement.
that's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those were two
Yeah.
of the most bootleg. They weren't the most popular band. Obviously, they were very popular, Crows, but there were certain bands that people were more into the. Well, with Crows, it was definitely the live recordings, and with Pumpkins, it was the B sides. People were trying to collect and stuff like that. Interesting. The only other things I have before we get into the show itself, recorded at Denver University.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, was recorded in their hockey arena, which that they also use for concerts, and it fits about 8,000. Now, I don't know if 8,000 were there at the time. I'm guessing no, but still a lot of people. I don't know. You know me, I'm really weird on weird trivia. On the track list on the back, for some
Mm-hmm.
reason, hanging around is lowercase, where everything else is uppercase. I don't know why, because on the Desert Life it's uppercase. And this title, which maybe you can add more before Face the Promised Land. It's because mentioned in the Rain King, which we'll get to the alt, but that but the one thing I don't know, Chris, and might as well do it now because it's the name of the. Why did they say Face the Promised Land when the Thunder Road that they use is what Case the Promised Land?
It's an error. It's that's I think that's the joke. It's Adam misremembers the words because he's doing it pretty much off the top of his head,
That's
Oh,
right.
okay.
and he
So,
just didn't. He screwed up that word. It's okay.
I thought it was him actually just adding a little bit of personal touch that he's not casing the promised land; he wants to face the promised land. And now you, burst my bubble there, Chris and Rich.
it is a more Counting Crows line when you think
Yes.
about it, right? We're gonna stand up and like face the promised land. It sounds a little bit like it makes me think of like Mrs. Potter's,
Yeah.
right? Like standing up and yeah, they're not casing anything. They're just
Okay. Well,
accepting it, facing
thank
it.
you for this is why you're on. We didn't pre-screen questions. I didn't ask Jeff ahead of
Maybe
time.
Bruce did it wrong. Face is better.
Right. Exactly.
Well, there
Yeah.
was a thing recently where Bruce was on Jimmy Fallon and they were quoting the thing and he's looking at the back of something that like what's the actual lyric and he's like, "No, the back of the thing is wrong or I've been singing it wrong for 40 years." So Bruce is not infallible either. I did look up. It's an interesting time that they started doing Thunder Road, and I don't know if this was in part the inspiration or maybe it was on Adam's mind for this reason. But this is actually right when the E Street Band got back together. They broke up in the late '80s, weren't together all the '90s, and this is right. They went on that reunion tour in 1999. I don't know if Adam saw them
Oh.
and was like Thunder Road, and it just had it in the back of his brain. But that is an interesting. It's a topical reference in a sense in the Rain King there.
Thank you. So let's go to Rich. So one of the, we probably would have had Rich on the podcast at some point anyway. I guess Rich wrote me, and he didn't know we were actually thinking about covering these bootlegs fairly soon anyway. And he said, I've listened to these a lot, and I also listened to it live because I was there when they recorded this concert. So, Rich, if you want to talk about either some story or just
Yeah.
the general experience there, yeah.
Set the stage for us.
I'm going to set the stage. So I was 24 at the time. If you recall, Across the Wire come out the year before, 98.
Mhm.
And that's what really like opened my mind to Crows because of how they reworked all those songs and the alts, everything you talked about on that podcast. And in that interim, I was just trying to find any sort of good bootleg you could get, like Live at Fox Theater was one. So I was really excited about this show. This Desert Life had just come out. Like I was into all the alts that you could get your hand on, and it would be my second show. And I really didn't remember the first that much. I was 24. I was a lieutenant in the Air Force. I was stationed in Wyoming and lived in Cheyenne. I was 2 years into a long distance relationship, had just gotten engaged the month prior, and it would end up being a 4 year long distance relationship. And it worked out great. My wife's Kathleen. We've been married 23 years now. Um, but it was tough for both of us kind of being apart those 4 years while I served. So I get the tickets to the show. I was meeting a friend down there. It's a 2 hour drive. At the time, all I had was printed MapQuest directions because no cell phone, no Google Maps. And I head out to the show and I am looking all over. I get to Denver and I cannot find this arena. And I'm like starting to lose my mind. And then I realized MapQuest didn't recognize Magnus Arena. So they just pointed me to the geographic center of Denver. And I'm doing circles in the middle of Denver trying to find this arena. So I remember going into a gas station, just like zooming in the parking lot. I'm getting a little frantic. The show is coming up. I run inside. I'm asking the clerk, "Do you know where this Magnus Arena is?" No idea what I'm talking about. I start just like berating customers inside the convenience store. And finally, someone points me in the right direction because the ticket only said Magnus Arena. I didn't know it was University of Denver. It ends up, the arena was just built in 99. So the locals didn't even kind of know it.
Mm.
So I get back in the car. I do find the arena. I pull in, I go out, and I realize I had my wallet in the middle of my car. And when I ran to the gas station, those 2 minutes, someone stole my wallet out of my car.
Oh.
And I had like two emotions hit me. One was, thank God I kept a ticket in my pocket and not my wallet. That was number one. And number two is all I wanted was like one beer at the show. And now I have no ID and no cash. But you just gotta shake it off. Ended up missing the openers, frankly, which I still regret because of just trying to find the place. But found my buddy. He bought me a beer, and it really was a great
Good
show.
friend.
Adam was in a great mood. The audience was really great. It was a really good show. It was a good one to release.
Oh,
So where were you?
fantastic.
So first of all, Eric was saying it's 8,000 holds 8,000 people.
Yeah.
How full was it? Was it like
I remember being pretty full, so it probably was. It was probably 8,000 because it's like 8,000 for like a hockey game or basketball game, but they had the floor. I was GA on the floor, so between floor and stands, it's probably like 8,000 if I had to guess.
Somewhere
It's
in that range.
murky.
And how close did you get? You got there late,
I
but
was
did your
late,
friend,
so I
yeah.
think I was more. I try to make my way to almost where the soundboard area is because you're
Mm,
kind of on the floor, but a little back and kind of see everything. I think that's where I was.
that's a good strategy. That's
Yeah,
for listeners, you ever late to a show, just go for the soundboard and then just start from there. That's the strategy, right? It's like if you can
right.
get to the soundboard, it's at least going to sound okay. And so then if you just kind of move forward, just like you walk forward and as far as like the crowd will kind of let you get, you just go. And if it's like crowded and you're just stuck, then you're stuck and you just
Yeah.
kind of
And
you
normally the
stop.
crowd surges forward, and you get like a
Mm.
little space. You can walk up. It's good.
Was the crowd still like I feel like late 90s. I feel like 90s crowds were more strongly surging forward in my
Oh
mind.
Yeah, for
yes.
sure. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that is definitely. Yeah, that ties into the whole, crowd surfing and pushing to the front. It's definitely, and I know partly because we were younger as well. But that's it. And Zephry, this ties into something we talked about, which is that they were playing at a lot of colleges. Now, this was a weird
Mhm.
one in that Denver obviously is a big city, and you didn't have to be a college student to attend. But that was kind of part of their strategy, I guess, at the time. I know Joe
Hmm.
talked about that to kind of, yeah, like get the public to go, but also be at a college where, right, they were a big enough name that almost all the students would go. Like
Yeah.
even at a smaller school, even a smaller school of 6,000 students, well, probably 4,000 will go to the concert, just because they don't get Counting Crows to visit them that much. Back in the '90s.
And they were probably
Um,
fans too. College kids back
oh
then
yeah,
were
Yeah.
now it's like, who's the Counting Crows? I'm like, oh, come
right.
on.
Well, speaking of which, is funny. I was actually thinking of this. We were talking, in our pregame before we started recording about certain heights of the Crows. I actually think that this was um, their apex in obviously it's not the record that sold the most. That would have been August, and the hardcore fans we were talking about. You like those? What were the shows? The 3 day shows?
Oh, the
Wellmont.
Belmont, right?
Belmont Theater, yeah.
Belmont. But this one, but and again, the first show I went to was on this tour. But this was like the time that I think in a lot of way apex, because it was still a big deal when they released a single. Like Hanging Around, as I said, was on
Mm,
MTV. They had 3 albums of songs to choose from. They were a big enough name that people would go just to go. Like, oh, it's Crows. Okay, fine, I'll see them. And then they had like the mainstream popularity, but they partly because of Across the Wire, and because each album was a bit different, is they also had the hardcore fans as well, right? That they weren't just like, oh, I liked one album and now I'm on to other stuff. There are people kind of developing this like deeper relationship with them. That's why we still have the podcast here decades later. So anyway, yeah, in some ways, I thought this was kind of the apex of the Crows.
the apex of, like, to your point, the intersection of them being like a big band, like a
Yes,
really big popular radio band, as opposed to more of like a cult band. And so you've got like
exactly.
a big cult around this time, right? It's not like everyone's just there to see Mr. Jones, right? You've probably driven away like the most casual of fans at this point. But at the same time, they're still selling 8,000 people. It's still a big deal. There's still a lot of people who are Counting Crows fans. Whereas as you get towards the early 2000s, they're getting much more towards being, uh, again, they've never been like a cult band in the really tiny sense, but
Yeah,
like more of a sort of a quiet thing.
that's right.
Um, yeah.
No, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. That was the phase that they were on here.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go into. If anybody doesn't have anything else, without any further ado, let's move into the actual songs. And again, maybe I'll mention the songs, maybe my take, and then Rich, if you have something either you remember or
Yeah.
you listen to it a lot of times. Mr. Jones, I think we mentioned this once on the podcast. I forget why, in brief passing, when they did this, like the mix of styles, right? So they
Hmm.
took the Across the
Well,
Wire
maybe
version and mixed it with their regular electric version.
maybe your show, Eric, right? Because it's
Yeah,
the Hammerstein show that you went to is not long before this, and they were using this as an opener a lot around
maybe
this
that's
time.
what it was. Yeah, and I
But
remember the
I always love this that they're
yes.
sort of finding the middle ground between the two versions and creating this other whole new thing.
Yep, that's
Um,
one reason I think it's special. Rich, go to you.
Yeah, I just thought when they started with "So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star," and like what's coming, for the diehards knew what was coming from Across the Wire. It was really exciting, and to open with Mr. Jones, with a more casual fan maybe expecting it to be their closer, like turning it upside down.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
thought was thrilling, almost to the point where I thought they were almost prepping the audience, like you may not always hear Mr. Jones in a show because we have a big catalog. We have our third album at this point.
Yep.
We got a lot to cover. But it was a great version of it. I love how they put the "Have You Seen Me Lately" lyrics at the end of it. It's
Oh
great
yeah,
version.
I
yeah.
forgot about that.
Yeah. Well,
Zephry,
and
do you
that's
have
a
any?
really
Oh,
strong.
yes.
I always like the idea of like a mission statement at the top for them, and
Mm.
it's an interesting mission statement to be like, here's Mr. Jones. It's not going to be too slow, but we're gonna fuck the shit out of Mr. Jones to begin the show, and like get ready because here we're gonna go wherever we feel like here because we've played your favorite song, but we've played a weird version of it to start the show. You know.
Zephry, anything to add or?
Yeah, I love the "So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star." One of my favorite, I don't know if it's a bootleg, 'cause it's on YouTube, is the Woodstock '99 recording, which is
Mm.
also from the '90s, obviously. And I just feel like there's not a lot of Counting Crows from 1999. Like, I've got a recording from South Africa that was actually their next show after Woodstock '99. I really
Mm.
liked that era because Immer was new in the band as a touring musician. He played on
Mm-hmm.
the first album, so their sound was changing, and the way they were playing Mr. Jones, Omaha, some of these other songs was different as opposed to Dan on mandolin with Omaha and some of the other stuff. So it was like the next phase of the band was like the Desert Life tour era. So if you guys know more stuff, I love that era, and I just can't
Yeah,
find this, much from
yeah.
it.
Chris, Emmy officially did join the group. Was it they joined right after recording Desert Life? I mean, again, I've said it before. He's in the
Yeah.
photo in Desert Life, but wasn't an official member.
Yeah, this is where he is joining the band. He's got very long hair at this point,
Yeah.
which for like, because it's not that. I mean, it's like early 2000s. He like cuts the hair, so like
Yeah,
it's like 20 years ago. So it's like very strange to see Emmy with the like really like full like a top knot and just like hair down past his shoulders.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does add an interesting thing. I think there's a couple of other there's tapes around this time. There's not a lot of great tapes. There's a few other radio broadcasts, although I think a bunch of them. I think Boston from this year is '99 is a radio broadcast. It's like a Halloween, I want to say, and then there's some radio broadcasts from like early in 2000 where it's kind of this still basically an extension of the same tour. I'll send you some links, Zephry. We'll take care of you
okay, please,
because this is
yeah,
a good because this is a good. I think this is a good era. Like the band is kind of
yeah,
firing on all cylinders in a lot of ways.
yeah,
Adam introduces Immer as David on the
yeah,
show.
Oh, I was
yeah,
gonna. I put that as trivia. Put that as trivia. I think, or if I'm correct, he might have said Dave for him, and for Bryson, I think he said David. Like because I listened to it again, but I actually had like
Yeah,
five little trivia things, and I was like, because we joked with our other guests on the show, including like James Campion, that like it's Immer Gluck, like no one
right.
calls him, but in this one he calls him Dave, and then David, and of course now David Bryson, he says Dave, right? He doesn't say David.
this is my pal
So
Dave.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So I don't know. Thanks for catching that, Rich. I caught that too. So maybe we'll do a couple in a row. Like if you have any sense on any of these. So I'll do the next three songs. Angels, I Wish I Was a Girl, and High Life. Angels, of course, to me the highlight is that they play the rocking version, which I
Right.
don't know if we're ever gonna hear again. There's just something. There's a skeptic in me that thinks that he's not going to do that. Like if he plays Angels again, it'll be the acoustic. I Wish I Was a Girl. I love live, and I didn't, as I said a couple times, I didn't appreciate it back then as much as I do now. I thought it was great, and High Life was amazing, and I think they even added some extra effects near the end, guitar effects that I haven't heard otherwise. But Rich, I'll go to you about those three songs.
Well, I thought it was interesting they opened the show with one song from each album sequentially. You
Oh,
know, Mr. Jones'
Hmm.
Silences, I Wish I Was a Girl. Um, and I don't have much to add. I mean, Wish I Was a Girl, I do appreciate it more now. I don't know if you guys talked about it when you did This Desert Life, but it seems like a sequel to Goodnight Elizabeth, and how he speaks to her saying, Elizabeth, you know, I'm doing all right these days. Um, it reminds me like all of us have had those short relationships when you were very young, and you know they don't work out, but you just want good vibes to those people back and forth. You just hope everyone's doing okay now,
well,
and
good
that's why I
vibes,
thought it was a beautiful of a song.
but it's good to me. It's always been good vibes with a little bit of jadedness. Like I always
A
thought
little
that.
bit,
I thought, hey, I'm doing all right, and also you didn't believe me, right? So there's a little
right?
bit of like, I agree with you though about how, yeah, when you're younger, those short-term relationships, if they're powerful, can really stick with you.
And he says, "One of those dreams, you forgive me."
Yeah.
But then he concludes it with kind of that insomnia theme from Recovering the Satellites that just
Hmm.
kind of comes on over and over. I can't sleep at night. It's fascinating.
That's true.
Well, he can't have
Um,
those dreams. He can't have those dreams if he can't get to sleep, though.
Right.
You know, it is interesting that he's like. I'm curious. It'd be interesting to sort of trace that, like, because that is like it's like 5 years after that relationship that he wrote, 4 or 5 years.
Hmm.
But it is interesting sometimes. Yeah, those things where you just like you can't let it go. You know.
Yeah.
Zephry, anything about those three songs, Angels, that are Wish It Was a Girl and High Life, since you hadn't heard many concerts from this era before?
Yeah, I love Angels. Obviously, just the studio recording, any live version. I love that song. But then another thing, because at this point in '99 was when Immer joined, so they kind of he added some different parts to it, and they do a little bit of
Mm.
harmonizing at the guitar solo, and so they change it in a way where they really add to it, and it's really cool. Like it's such a cool addition, his parts. And with "I Wish I Was a Girl," that song's grown on me too. It's a pretty calm song until the end, where I can't sleep at night, and Adam's just going. There's a version from like 2000 when they're at some festival in Germany in some
Hmm.
stadium, and the crowd is just going nuts at that part because he's just revving them up, and that's what I think when I realized this song's awesome. Like it's sometimes the studio versions for me for the Crows, I love them, but you just don't get the feeling. Adam always gives you that emotion live. You could tell that he was probably feeling when he wrote it and recorded it. So that's what makes it so personal is seeing them either live or on YouTube or whatever and really feeling like, oh, now I see this song is so personal to you. So
Yeah, and
being
yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if you heard that, but I actually mentioned I felt a little guilty, but I mentioned that to David Lowery that I actually thought that was the one track on Desert Life. I love it, but I didn't. I think I don't know if it was the mix or the recording, but I didn't appreciate it until hearing it live, and I think that
hmm
really got to what the song was trying to do musically. That didn't come across necessarily on the recording.
But I do
still
think
haven't
it's
heard
true.
that one live.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's true generally of this Desert Life is that the production on that album is great, but it's a very produced record. It's a very like thoughtful record and it's very intricate. And so there is something about them going out and playing those songs live and kind of being stripped back is I think maybe too strong a word, but there's less ornamentation just because there's less stuff they can do. There's only so many hands at one time and it kind of gets those songs a little bit more to their essence as opposed to the album is much more of a like a piece of music in many ways than the first couple of records. It's or maybe any other record since I would argue, but of theirs.
All right, great. Let's move. Next time, I'm going to take the slot of the next four songs, even though they're kind of all over the place. But
Mm.
we can just talk about them as a group. Which would be Omaha, Monkey, All My Friends in 4 Days. Omaha to me sounds perfect, but maybe not that much different than other versions. Again, one thing that will come up, I might not mention it again, but with like Omaha, St. Robinson, and there's another song I just can't think of right now. um, Obviously, Adam's voice is stronger back then and can do some extra things and belt out the end of Omaha that maybe you can't do it the same way nowadays. I'm not sure, but that of course caught my attention. Monkey, which I don't remember if I ever saw live. I want to see live. I love like you said, Rich. Even then, they were, even though they were super popular, they weren't going to play the greatest hits. They're going to play not only a B-side from the current album, but a B-side from like the prior album, which had more singles. Right?
Right.
They could have played Daylight Fading or something, but instead they played Monkey. And by the way, dedicated it to his current girlfriend, which is not the girlfriend that he has now. I know that.
No.
No.
Well, Rich, how you feeling? You saying you're coming in to listening to that show in a long distance relationship? Did that song because he tease it up? Does that song hit
Yeah.
you?
I mean, remember, this is the age of mixtapes, and you're making mixtapes. It was hard to throw Counting Crow songs on mixtapes to be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but Monkey was one that you could. With Monkey, he talked about having a girlfriend at the time and how this was the song he sang to her every night, because I'm assuming she wasn't with him physically during the
Mm-hmm.
tour. And so that version of Monkey, I find even more than so than the album, was more optimistic and hopeful than the recorded version. So it's a great version of the Monkey.
I was always more optimistic about that song until Jeff Harkness joined the podcast and said that was mostly about Courtney and she was like so toxic and everything. So now even like then he said that was part of the Courtney suite.
It is, and thinking about actually to our point about I wish I was a girl, right? Holiday in Spain is at least 5+ years after Monkey was written, and has a reference to Monkey, right? And not a positive one. Still thinking about it at that
Right.
point for Adam on that
Yeah.
one too.
Right.
Um,
That's true. So I agree. It is. I always thought of it as a fairly optimistic, or at least playful. I thought of it as more playful, of course, but which has a sense of optimism. But yeah, ever since right, thinking of Courtney, then whenever I hear Monkey now, Courtney Cox is coming to my mind, and I never really watched Friends that much.
Also, thinking about just the idea that again, it's at a college, and
Yeah.
obviously the amount of touring of colleges they did this time. A Counting Crows song referencing Ben Folds is like the college trifecta at this time. Like if they could have thrown in a
Great
word that
point.
was like from a Dave Matthews song or something, like it would have just broken like the whole arena in half. For 2000s era college kids.
It's funny you said that. I was actually going to mention, and I almost forgot about it. But when he mentions Ben Folds, if that was another time to see what I mentioned before, and I think I'm right on this. Like on this version, when they got Ben Folds, it's just Charlie because right, Ben Folds on the radio, and it's just Charlie going bump bump, on the piano real quick. Where nowadays, right, Millard and Jim bang and stare at each other on stage because they were both in Ben Folds. So you also hear the drum and the bass in the current version, and Jim like plays it so hard, bump bump, right? So anyway, just a little kind of
That's great.
Eric,
there.
when was the last time you remember they played Monkey? I think it was like 2015. They snuck it into
No,
some
they played it
show.
fairly recently. I want to say like in the last couple of years, maybe even last
Really?
year they played it once. I think last year they might have played it once. Chris will look it up. It's not frequent, but
Yeah.
I've seen it a couple times in the last 5 years, even though it's rare.
Really?
Um, Yeah. So then while Chris is looking that up, and then we got All My Friends in 4 Days, which I love All My Friends. And the shock, I mean, I guess I put it number 2 when I did my ranking, but under Mrs. Potter, but I was tempted to put it up. And the shocking, not shocking, it's not shocking. The more surprising thing to me about this one was, and they haven't played All of My Friends like we've talked about for like 15 years or something ridiculous.
Oh,
But
wow.
when they used to play it all the time live, they have that kind of extended ending, right? Right, which I love, and I always thought and I think we even said it once that the studio version should have been more jamming. And when they play that extended ending, that almost passes Mrs. Potter. I just love it. I think the Charlie and guitar, and it's such. It sounds like cacophony. I guess the word, right? It sounds like they're just like wailing on instruments, but it's so musically, I don't know, sound and logical. It is not just random sounds. Like I think it's like beautiful, but lots of things going on. And anyway, I love that. But the point is, they were doing that shortly. Like they had just released This Desert Life, and so they already kind of added that. I guess I'm going to say alternate version or extended version that they played ever since. I always thought it was like 5 years later or something like that. And then I'll move to you guys with all these. But then in 4 Days, I don't know. That's always a nostalgic song for me, especially I just like the song live. So, Rich, for any of those, anything else with Omaha, Monkey, All My Friends, 4 Days?
Well, Omaha is funny because if anyone's ever driven cross country, it's obligatory to play the song in Omaha. And this was the version I played in Omaha in 2001 driving across. But I love that song. It was a beautiful version. With all my friends, he talked about getting to the age and being a bit envious of friends who are getting married or having kids and moving on. And he called out two friends in the audience that night that were in that stage of life. And I feel like they always up it a notch when they know they got friends there. Maybe they have friends at most shows, but like when they're calling out, "My friends are here tonight," you feel like it's going to be a great show. Um, and he said in the song lyrics, he talks about being 33, and he was 35 at the time. What does he do now? Does he still say 33, or oh, he hasn't played it in 15
They
Yeah.
years?
haven't
So,
played it. Yeah, I think
yeah,
He did play. He did say 43 a couple
Yeah.
times later.
43.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
But the piano playing at by Charlie at the end of All My Friends, it's just gets right to you. He's just
yeah.
banging those keys perfectly. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, I don't think I said it yet. One of the, and again, I've noticed this more, and I think I noticed in another live recording, but in the, or maybe something with the soundboard. I'm not an engineer, but Charlie is very high on the mix. I thought here higher than the albums, and I can hear him more. And of course, I love it. There's
Yeah,
even
me
parts of
too.
Rain King that we can hear more. And again, anytime that Charlie, and I could be totally wrong. I always thought that Charlie on the mix is lower on like the first 3 or 4 albums, and then in the most recent albums, like Underwater Sunshine, Somewhere Under Wonderland, and Butter Miracle, that they do put him higher. And that's just me. I think I hear him more in the more recent albums, but this one too. Chris, yeah.
Well, I will know. Well, first of all, I really hope they bring sometime, maybe in 2027, they can bring All My Friends back, so Adam can sing that he's 63.
Yeah,
So that'd be good. That'd be
That's fine.
interesting, different.
yeah.
And I just to answer the question before, the last time they played Monkey was in 2022. The last time before that, though, was 2016. And
Mm.
weirdly, just looking at the different places they played it, for some reason, frequently outside the US. Don't know why. Something about being in Europe or Australia just makes them think of Monkey. Um, I mean, I've seen them like 60 times. I think I've only seen that song once based on this. I think it was
Wow.
Jones Beach in 2006, it looks like, as I'm looking at the, just, but yeah, because they played it, but they play it very, very sparingly. They never seem to play it for more than like 3 or 4 shows. And then they're like, I'm good with this now. But
As much as I
Zephry,
love
yeah.
Butterfly in Reverse, I'm like, let's play a different one off that album. Come on, guys. Heard it 3 shows now. You know?
they've really
Yeah.
fallen in love with that song.
I know. But like, I
Yeah,
mean,
They play it
it's
for 20 years. They played it 78 times.
yeah,
Well,
seriously.
probably more than that, actually.
Yeah.
Zephry, I've been to 20 shows. I just had to verify. I was pretty sure. I've never seen him play Monkey. I would love to. I would love
Wow.
to hear that.
Yeah, I'd love to
So,
hear that.
okay, so then we're going to go into two, and I haven't heard. I'll just let Rich and Chris talk about this. But there are two songs. Actually, there's three, but there's two right here that, for those that didn't know, and I wouldn't have known, that is excluded from the tracks of the CD. The CD has 14 songs, but they actually played 17 in this concert. So the next two were Round Here and everyone's favorite that never gets played, Amy Hit the Atmosphere. Rich, let's go to you first about those two or anything. Yeah.
With Round Here, that version of it, I would just say any fan go seek it out, find it. It's out there online somewhere. I think it's a beautiful version of it. Being in the crowd when that guitar starts and everyone knows what's coming, it's like the crowd gets to that collective Zen state where the hair stands up on the back of your neck almost at the beginning around here. For me, anyway. Um, I listened to that version around here around Blue Sky Baby, and it was right inside me all the time for years, and had no idea that was a Dylan. It's a Dylan song. I had to Google it recently. I'm like, oh, that's where it's from. But it's a really, really beautiful version. There was one tiny maybe misstep where he normally gets to the part where he screams no, and he didn't, and it like jerks to the kind of like skips it. I think it goes into the music, but probably got left off the album just for time on the physical CD. It's a 10, 11 minute song. This version, uh, but really one of my favorites.
So
Okay.
which Dylan song is that?
I don't know. I googled it. I started googling those lyrics um, and then on the YouTube, if you look at the Face of Promised Land YouTube, in the comments, lots of people are talking about Dylan. So I'll have to research it some more.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an incredible. I can't say enough about how good this version of this is. Um, it's a very first of all, it's one of those versions where Adam gets it very, very quiet and gets it up. And I actually really like there's a like the it's all right part where he kind of gets the crowd singing with him, which is pretty cool. And like kind of bringing because he takes the song to like a very desolate place and then to a very hopeful one. Um, it's a really really good version. I think there's a few like I think they use the Blue Sky thing variations on it a bit around this time. So this isn't the only version of that but it is highly recommended. I think it's insane that they cut. I know it's 11 minutes long. They would have had to cut probably like 2 or 3 other things.
Right.
I mean, for my taste, they should have done it.
Yeah, me too.
It's a
But it
bootleg.
turns out to be it's a bootleg, right?
We
But
want to hear it.
it turns out to be like this. I think it turns to be like a fun secret where yeah, like I bought that CD in the basement of Generation Records, and I remember driving around with my buddy Adam, and we were like, "What is this?" Like, let's listen to that again. Let's do it again. I want more. It's really good. It's
Yeah.
we should have. I say I feel like Matt. We didn't do it on our round here versions. I feel like that was a miss, but that's another one added
I
to the
was
list of absolute classics of
I
the
was
round here
yelling to the
collection.
podcast without listening to that whole episode. I'm like, Magnus, you gotta listen to the Magnus version.
It's
Yeah,
a
blame
mistake.
Chris.
I'm not. We're not perfect. I'm not
No,
perfect.
blame Chris. I don't know any
Do my
of these.
best.
He had to bring these up to me.
There's a lot. I
That's
used to maybe remember more. You know, now
Yeah.
you know you get to your mid 40s, you get your 40s. It starts
True.
to blend together a little bit.
You know, with Amy hits the atmosphere, it would have been for sure the first time the whole audience heard that song played live, and just hearing it live, it's a special song. I think it's a painful one for him though. Maybe I don't hear it as much.
yeah, then they only played. I think we said that tour. They played that tour, maybe even just that fall, and then I think they played it for like 4 months and never played it again. Um, okay, so then we have Saint Robinson. I don't have anything to add because I don't think it's much different than other live versions. What just when we were talking here, and I'm going to say some stuff later about some of the banter, and we've already talked about a bit. But you're right, Rich. He explains what High Life was about. I think he even explained "I Wish I Was a Girl," right? And he explained
Yes.
"All My Friends." He does not explain Saint Robinson unless I missed
No.
it. I don't. Has he ever explained it? I
I,
forget
I
now.
still ask someone. I need to know what St. Robinson, the Cadillac Dream.
Who is he? I don't. Andrew
I,
Robinson. Where who is
keeps me up at night. Like St. Robinson, who is it?
it? So
Add that to
anyway,
the list if we ever get Adam on this
yeah.
show.
Who is
That's
Andrew
who.
Robinson?
Because what I was
What the
gonna
hell is St.
say,
Robinson about?
what I was gonna say, it's maybe one of the first songs where it's like less biographical, and like some of his more recent work. It's not
Yes.
about him anymore.
Right.
And I
Right.
was thinking that was St. Robinson's, but then it totally goes into his childhood and Maryland and Virginia. I'm like, I don't know, maybe he's mixing it together. Would love to
Yeah.
know.
No, you're right, Rich. Because even on the ones where he said "Somewhere Under Wonderland," it's more that he's trying to do these third person stories, but he still mixes in like right there. We'll talk about it when we get to that album. But there's the line about his sister mentioning, "Hey, Adam," So there is some
Uh,
autobiographical. But you're right. Maybe it was the first tease of that where it was
and
90%.
who's Carrie? He
Yeah,
mentions Carrie in that song.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so then we'll go to hanging around,
Rain King.
but Rain
Gotta
King,
talk about
yeah,
Rain King.
which is right where they face the Promised Land. I just listened to it again maybe before. Anyway, as Chris knows, the one reason I love him is having him on the show is I'm not as much of the alt guy or the extended version around here. I like it, but not as much as Chris. But I do think that this probably is my favorite extended alt version of Rain King. I just think it's perfect, and I don't have anything else to add. So let's go to Rich and then Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, with this one, I have a confession to make. It's really embarrassing. As a born and bred New Jersey native, when I heard this, I had no idea it was Bruce Springsteen. I was a dumb 25-year-old. My history with Bruce started with Born in the USA and went to like Tunnel of Love and Human Touch.
Hmm.
I never got into the back catalog back then. It's not as easy as it is now, where you're like, I'm going to go deep dive on this artist on streaming. So when I heard this and then listened to the boot for some time, I'm like, Adam's a genius. He's the songwriter of our generation, and he is. But like, not knowing Thunder Road was Bruce, it's embarrassing. But it's still my favorite alt, just like yours, Eric. It's just a beautiful how he weaves it into the song. Um, And like I said, maybe Bruce should update his lyrics to have "Face the Promised Land" be
Oh,
the version he sings.
well, Rich, I also didn't know because I have to admit, I'm not a big Bruce fan. And then
Yeah,
I don't, and then it's, even though I know he's good, then I have this thing where I'm almost kind of against it because had that renaissance starting in like 2005 where he has these hardcore fans that go to every show.
right.
And
Yeah,
I'm like, no, forget that. That's a different group. That's, I don't know, the Jersey group. I'm not part of that anymore or whatever. And yeah, instead I wear my Pete Yorn stuff and say he's the true Jersey guitar guy. And but yeah, but I did no. But just to your point, then we'll go to Chris. That I didn't never knew it was a Bruce song until he actually mentions the word Thunder Road, and I knew that Thunder Road was a Bruce song, even though I didn't know much about it. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is a Bruce Springsteen song.
yeah.
Chris, let's go to you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's just interesting. It's one of those things that circle around in life. Buddy Joe Firstman from Cordova's saw them a week ago, and his aunt was in town. Is a big fan. He closed the show with Thunder Road on piano, and it's just like a whole room full of people on the Lower East Side, of New York, just singing. Actually, no, like Greenwich Village. Honestly, about 2 blocks from Generation Records. As I'm thinking about it, it's pulling it all together, but singing Thunder Road. It's just such a great song. It's a classic, and it's better. I mean, it's interesting. The original version is great. Bruce has a piano version that is spectacular. Um, I think I'm with you guys. This is, first of all, I think this is one of the first alts I heard. Because I'm pretty sure this was a very popular, Napster LimeWire song
Right.
around this time, right? This was the one where if you were searching Counting Crows Rain King, you were probably going to turn up this version of Rain King, and you were going to hear it with Thunder Road and go, well, that's really fucking cool. Um, and I'm with you. There's a lot of versions of Rain King I love. This is high up for me. This might not be my number one, but I do think it is a really perfect marriage, because when you think about, I was thinking about like why this week, and it kind of hit me. It never really hit me before. I've been listening to this for 20 plus years. Um, the narrators of both songs are singing very similar things. They are both sort of pleading with this other person about, can I come over? Can we be together? Where can we go? And it makes the Thunder Road section a very natural extension of what the narrator in Rain King is saying. You could very easily, if you really kind of and I didn't sort of sit there and go all the way line by line, but you could very easily just continue the conversation into Thunder Road of like, you know, can I come in? Can we be together? I'm riding out tonight. Come on, let's go face the promised land together. Like it is a very, very perfect marriage. And again, it's something that apparently he just sort of hit him off the top of his head, and obviously did it a bunch of times once they realized it was awesome. But it's perfect. One of the classic. I think whenever their career is done, you put together like the classic versions of songs. This is going to be one of them.
Great. Zephry, you have anything to add for any of the last couple songs we've talked about?
Yeah, so building on Rain King, I think the first time I heard the Thunder Road version was the Live at Town Hall, actually. I think I had listened to that before I had found Face the Promised Land. And that one, you can obviously see and hear. And Adam's just like so into it, and it's just amazing. Like, I don't know Bruce Springsteen that well, but I knew that was a song. And I mean, it's not easy to sing other lyrics of a song to or a different song in another melody. I don't know if you guys have tried that. I've tried it, and even like songs super well, you're like, I can't even remember the words. So it's amazing how he does that, and how he gets so into it. And in the town hall version, he's like almost acting out the different parts, and it just seems like the band rehearsed that. And they maybe did a little bit, but like a lot of that is straight improv, and it's just impressive. And for me, that one's great. I Come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. That one was Oh Susanna. That was one of my
Mm,
favorites. And there's a few when he's gone into Mr. Jones and Raining in Baltimore in the
mm.
middle. I really like those too. There's really not a bad version of Rain King, even on the show we saw, Eric, where he basically just goes right back into the verse like the recording.
Right.
Even that is fine. There's to me there's really no bad version of Rain King.
Yeah. There's a great story about when they did the town hall thing. They had decided like a week before they were going to play all of August. and apparently they had a moment backstage where they realized that because like Millard had never played Electric Rain King, so they had to like teach it to him because they'd been playing it acoustic since he joined the band in 2000. So they had to teach it, and they basically had to learn. He'd like never played the Thunder Road part. He'd never. They were just like, oh, we should do Thunder. Well, let's do Thunder Road. And so he had to. But yeah, they basically, for Millard at least, it was very very fresh. It
Wow.
like literally was like,
Wouldn't know.
because we're gonna do this. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
That's cool.
Great. So then to end the main set, they ended with hanging around. There's not a lot for me to say except that he does mention the opening acts, which because I think we're both of them on his label, Gigolo
Mhm.
Ants and Joe 90 on the E Pluribus Unum, right?
Unum,
Records,
yeah.
which eventually we'll talk about on the podcast. And then the encore was a 4-song encore, the first being Colorblind, which is omitted from the track list, which again, that does not bother me at all because I've heard it a lot. I think it's interesting because that was one of the popular songs, and I'm glad that they knocked that out and didn't knock out like 4 Days or whatever. I liked hearing those other ones. And then I'll let you guys talk about this, and also, which maybe is, if you were a fan, had to be the most surprising song that they played, which is as an encore song, played "Kid Things," and I think it sounded great. And I think I put that as my least favorite song in Desert Life. I still like it, but I would love to hear that live. Rich,
Yeah.
let's go to you.
Yeah, with Kid Things, he joked that he was going to play something hidden we never play live,
Oh,
and then
right,
jumped into Kid Things.
I caught that.
And being a big fan, and knowing about the hidden song and it coming, it was like, I can't believe Kid Things. And it's a very fun song. It's kind of less tortured song compared to what normally he had in the first 2 albums. So it was really thrilling to hear about that, to hear it. And did we talk
Zephry,
about Long
oh,
December yet? We didn't get to
no,
that
that's
yet.
next. That's
I'll
next.
wait.
Zephry, anything about the last couple songs hanging around? Kid Things?
Yeah, it was and hanging around. I always love like the banter in between songs. I love how he said, I think it was before hanging around where he says, the other bands have already gone, they're we gotta go to Salt Lake City tomorrow. They're driving through the snow. I just like things like that are just cool. It's
Yep,
like little
I agree.
timestamps. But Rich, one thing I wanted to ask you before I forget, in 4 Days, I know there's a live version from probably 10 something years ago where Millard plays the electric guitar part and Emmy's playing bass. Do you remember, was Matt playing electric guitar? And
Matt was there, but I can't remember. He was probably on bass. I just can't remember for
okay,
sure. Yeah,
I'm just curious how they played that back then before
I don't know.
Matt left.
Zephry, I was going to mention it before, but I also like, of course, if there's too much banter, you might skip it if you listen to the CD 100 times. But I like the banter here, and I like
Mm.
when you said the timestamp. I didn't talk about it yet, but there was, I guess it was for. Wait, was it for "I Wish I Was a Girl"? I guess right when he talked about leaving messages
4
on.
days.
Oh,
Yeah,
4 days. Sorry. Yes,
yeah.
Mm.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
We're leaving messages on the answer machine. But the equivalent now would be if you text a girl like a couple times, she doesn't text back, and then you wait a couple more days and you text her more. That's what he was basically
yeah.
getting
He'd
at.
have to rename the song from 4 Days to 3 dots.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
waiting.
Yeah, but you're not getting the
So,
dots.
so
Right.
that made me laugh. Chris, anything with you with hanging around or Kid Things?
No.
Okay. So then we ended the song. We'll do both Long December and Walkaways, and I'll let Rich talk about Long December. I know I like. Now I can't. I should have wrote better notes. I think the beginning of the song is a little different than he plays it now, right? And I
Yeah.
liked it because now he basically plays that the same way. And of course, I get super nostalgic, and we've talked about it a couple times. I would love if they started ending some shows with Walkaways. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
anyway, Rich.
I mean, just what a killer ending to the show. That intro, this version, Long December, is really been my favorite, and there are lots of great, amazing versions. But that intro with it was a bad month in September, October
Mm.
scared the hell out of me, lonely November, December's where I want to be, and then he goes into Long December. The crowd lost their mind. It's always special listening to this song when it's actually December too. It was December 2nd,
Mm.
when they're playing
Mm.
it, and we touched on it, but at the time, my wife, my fiance, then we were doing great, but it was really hard, and like you're both kind of just holding on, waiting to like for me to finish my commitment and duty, and then I was going to move back, and then we were going to get married. Um, and this song just touched me in that way of just keep holding on. And then also maybe because living in Wyoming at the time, and those in the Midwest can relate. But it's been so long since I've seen the ocean, it like hits in a really
Hmm.
strong way because it's true. Like it's been a couple of years since I've seen the ocean, but really beautiful version. I'll never forget the line, the way that light attaches to a girl. Um, so that's what I have to say about Long December. I'll hold on Walkaways if you guys want to talk more about Long December.
It's a really beautiful that intro is really wonderful. We talked in the last episode about, or a couple episodes ago now, about how you can draw, these threads of like Adam's intro in Long December. And this is kind of one of the first ones where he was doing this kind of extended thing to open up the song. And you can draw a thread from this all the way probably to the one. It's
Yeah.
it's great. If you haven't heard this version, again, highly recommend. You can go find it on YouTube. And that, like this and the Rain King and the Round Tier, I think are like the sort of strongest recommendations of like, if you haven't heard these versions, like it's worth going checking them out.
Yeah, I agree. Rich, let's get your thoughts on Walkaways.
I agree with you, Eric. It's still my favorite closer. He should just add it on to Holiday in Spain even today. Just like takes a minute and a half. Just do a little
Exactly.
walkaways at the end of Holiday in Spain. Dan Vickery on guitar is just beautiful. It's the perfect ending, even if it's a bit sorrowful. Resonated deeply with me because I was going through that experience of we would see each other maybe every 2 months for like a week, and then it was like, okay, got to go. Someday I'm going to stay, but not today. And it's just heart wrenching. And so, just a beautiful end to the concert for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think I said on that Recovering the Satellites review, clearly my favorite, is that what it is? 90 seconds. So I was going to say my favorite less than 2 minute song of all time. I challenge you to give me another one, less than 2 minutes pop song that's as good. Yeah, I agree. It's one of the best. I mean, Holiday in Spain is a great closer. Walkaway is amazing. I thought once I saw Murder of One close, but maybe that was during the regular set list. And whatever in my mind, whether it happened or not, that was a surprisingly good closer. Or maybe I've seen some live concerts
Maybe
where they did end
was
with.
that on the deluxe version of August when the Paris show they closed with it?
Mhm.
Maybe.
Yeah, right. And also, I think the one in Devore that's online, they might have ended that. I can't remember, but that Murder of One, if he's going a little nuts, and jumping around, which again he was maybe in his 30s then, so it's not as easy to do. Was a great closer. Anybody, Zephry or anybody else, any other thoughts about this concert? I don't have any, but please, Zephry, we'll go to you.
Yeah, it's one that I listened to maybe 5 years ago and then re-listened to it again this past week. And it does just kind of have a very like just sacred feel to it. Like it's just like an emblem of the Crows and it just belongs like over here in this corner. Like this is just a great show. And I wasn't even there, but it just has that certain ring to it that is one of those shows. I was actually looking on eBay before we started. There was two copies and they were both mint like in the plastic and they were $100 each. I'm like, okay, well, if I want it, I guess I'm gonna have to spend that because it would be cool to have the CD of that, and because on the YouTube version it stops and then the next track kicks in, and that a CD would probably just go right through. So it's just I don't know, it's a really special time of the band, and they captured it so perfectly at that show.
Fantastic, Chris. For Face the Promised Land, before we go into the next segment of the episode, let's end with you. You're muted, I think.
It's a classic. It's a measure of it's talked about a really interesting period in the band's evolution. One of the things that's interesting about it is that if you look at relative to now, I was kind of interested in like looking at went back and I was looking at the set list after I listened to the show, but I was also looking at like the tour stats for 1999, and they played. It's Setlist FM is really messy to look at for 1999 because people broke out the alts in different ways, but they played somewhere in the range of like 35-ish songs that year. But and logical. I mean, they only had 3 records at that point. They were doing some covers, and um, it's a similar number to the number of songs they played this year. And I think the other thing that kind of comes, kind of look at the shows all together, right? Any of the shows in 99, 2000, they're not that different from one. Like, most of the songs are relatively similar to each other. But what really drives the reason I'm like, I've listened to a lot of these shows is the alt, right? This was a really special time in the evolution of Round Here. Um, Obviously, very much so in the evolution of Rain King, right? I mean, absolutely. This is really where Rain King goes from being a 5-minute song to an 8-minute song, and really like a springboard for them doing all sorts of cool stuff. And even Long December, right? Even this is where they're starting to play with these things. And I think similarly, having listened to a lot of the shows from this year, what was most interesting was when they were going off in a different direction, in particular in this summer and Round Here. And so it is interesting, 25 years ago, but the band is still, and the band has evolved a great deal since then. But you can still kind of find these connections. There's still this thread to a different time, obviously with a whole different batch of songs, though. As you talked about, there's a bunch of songs on this record that like don't get played anymore, haven't been played in a decade, or have been played like less than 10 times in the last decade.
Oh, Eric, you're muted.
Well, thank you. I hope our fans have appreciated our review of Face the Promised Land. And thank you for telling me that it was a mistake about the Bruce reference. So let's go to, now we spent the entire last episode talking about, well, first of all, we do have a little bit of news. So as of we're mid-September, this might be released in a couple weeks, but 2 pieces of news. Chris, first of all, you wanted to tell us about Counting Crows covers, not them covering songs, but people covering the Counting Crows. Please talk about that.
We've had a few things drop on Spotify over the last week or so. It seems that, based on a couple of posts about them, that some of Adam's friends, as 60th birthday presents, covered some of the band's songs, and a couple of them have made it up to Spotify now. Stephen Kellogg did Elevator Boots. It's a nice version of that song, an acoustic take on that. And Sean Barna and his collaborator Dave Drago did a really, really cool version of Mr. Jones. That's actually the one of any of the ones I'm going to talk about. That would be my highest rec, because it's a really fun reimagining of that song. Kind of looking a little bit like this version from Face the Promised Land, that it's kind of like a middle ground between the sort of extremes of the slow and the fast of the song. They kind of find a very cool way to get into it. Highly recommended. Also, Noah Gunderson, we talked about last year. He'd been covering Round Here. His version is now up on Spotify. Nice clean recording of that if anyone wants to check that out. And cool. He's going on tour this fall if anyone wants to go check him out.
Okay. Rich, you had a comment about that.
Yeah. I just recently came across another really good cover, I thought, which was Wesley Schultz, who's the lead singer of Lumineers. He put out an album of covers and did a version of Mrs. Potter's Lullaby. That's really interesting, very different, but worth checking out.
Yeah, we might have. Yeah, well, I was talking to Chris earlier today. We might have to do an episode about other people covering the Crows, mostly just to get other people to know about. Like, I don't know about that, so if we could, we'll just talk about them briefly and maybe list them and link to them in the show description, etc.
That's interesting. I actually was not aware that was a thing that happened either. So thank you for breaking more news, Rich.
I listened to the Elevator Boots one. It's good. Maybe it's not as good as some of the other, but I always love when people, and I know that was a single in the adult contemporary, I guess, chart or whatever it is, but I love when people cover, right? There's been a lot of different covers of Mr. Jones out there, or YouTube review, but I love when people cover either not as popular songs or B-sides. Yeah, I actually saw there's someone, I found another, I think it's Amy Hit the Atmosphere. I was finding somebody else on the piano recently who covered I think it was Amy Hit the Atmosphere, but other Crow songs. I'm like, I love this. This is great. Okay, so the other big news that happened yesterday, as we're recording this, is they played Chris a some kind of Packers festival, but we thought it was noteworthy because of the crowd size, which looks like I don't even know how many thousands, but Jim has the Facebook photos, and it's huge. The crowd.
Yeah, and good for them. Yeah, they played like a whole headlining set at this Green Bay Packers kickoff festival, and I saw that. I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting thing to do, but looks fun. If you can go, you can take a look at the pictures on Jim's Facebook page, and it is people like as far as the eyes can see, like a large festival. It looks like.
Yeah, it almost looks
Um,
like Pink Pop or something, right? The crowd. I'm not saying it is
yeah.
that big, but that's how it looks like in the photos.
So
So
good for
that's
the
fun.
people of Green Bay.
Yes,
You got good taste.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do have good taste in music there in Wisconsin. Great. So let's then transition to we're going to do some final thoughts on the Oneness Tour of 2024, just the overall Crows summer season tour. And we use this time because Zephry and I met up and went to the official last show of the tour. And even though it was part of the Oneness Tour, they did not open for Santana in Costa Mesa. They were the headliners. uh, Toad the Wet Sprocket was the opener. Who Toad has opened for them before. What did we say, like 15 years ago? And they even mentioned
It's
that.
like
I forget
10.
the
Yeah.
exact. Yeah, which makes sense, right? They're kind of. I like both, and
Contemporaries. Yeah.
yeah, and I told Zephry, when I went home, Zephry, and actually probably because I've been thinking about Crows too much the last 2 years after starting the podcast, that I actually thought about Toad all week, to be honest, because I had seen them only once live, and I forgot that there was a point in my life where Toad, they might have been like my third favorite band for a couple of years. I kind of almost forgot that and kind of, I don't want to say rediscovered them. I know that, but anyway, for the week, I got into them. They played 10 songs. So I guess we'll start with the Toad. I have other things to say about the show, of course, but let's start with Toad. And they basically played, well, if they played 10 songs, I think, four were from Fear and four were from, now I forget how to pronounce the name. Was it
Dulcinea.
Dulcinea?
Yeah.
Or three were, and then they played the Good Intentions, the Friends song,
Acoustically,
and
though, remember they changed the
yes,
arrangement of that.
absolutely, which I thought was cool.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a great version. And then they played, I guess, one from Pale, I think it was, and then one which again, we could talk about some of these songs, but they played one from not their newest album, but their second most
Yeah,
recent,
New Constellation, I believe,
New
the
Constellation,
2014 release.
and the song is California Wasted,
Yeah.
which I think was their second single. But we're in California. They're from California. I guess they're from Santa Monica, which I didn't know. I had to look it up
Santa
this week.
Barbara, I think.
Santa Barbara, sorry.
Yeah.
Which you were, that's what, sorry, and you were north of, Rich, were you north of Santa Barbara or Santa Monica?
Just north of Santa Barbara,
Santa Barbara, that's what
Lompoc.
I thought. Yeah, yeah. So that's why, yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. They're from Santa Barbara, which I had kind of forgotten. And anyway, it's a great song, California Wasted. And
Yes.
I thought they were great. I mean, I know they basically played their greatest hits, and there's no real surprises. Uh, but yeah, California Wasted, great song. I invite this band. They're pretty interesting. I mean, this is the time, I guess, to talk about them. I'll never talk about them again on this podcast. But there was like a I guess he doesn't really love his first album, which was kind of a low release, and then even the second one, which sold fairly well, I guess he's tepid about. But they had like three, I guess, right, three then albums in a row, and they were all quite successful, and each one has what I call to be like singles that stand the test of time, kind of like Mr. Jones, right? There's a lot of songs like, I don't know, maybe from the Spin Doctors or something that was in your mind at the time, but if you hear it now, you're like, oh, whatever. But All I Want from the one album, and then Something's Always Wrong and Come
Mm.
Down. Those were three singles and three albums in a row, and I think they're fantastic to this day. And people don't. I guess Jeff, I'm interested in your take. Zephry, he said he just kind of discovered them fairly recently because he's 2 decades younger than us or something. But I thought that was neat because they do have a crossover, and Zephry didn't know that the lead singer, Glenn Phillips, they broke up over creative differences, and they didn't get back together for, what was it, like 15 years or something like that. And he released like five or so solo albums and
Mm.
other projects, which were fine, but they weren't they weren't. I guess some people when they go solo they're good, but it wasn't as good and a little softer. His versions are a little softer. Not that Toad the Wet Sprocket has any edge. They don't really have. Sorry, they don't have a hard edge. They don't have like the Angels of the Silence song, but having the rest of the band, they have a little more guitar and a little more of an edge that I think balances Glenn's softer view and voice. Just overall thoughts about Toad at the show and Toad in general, Zephry.
Yeah, well, I'm only 27, and I was one of the younger people there. From what I saw, I was talking to this couple in front of me, and they were, probably my parents' age, and they're like, "What?" Like I was singing to every song by both bands. They're like, "How do you know this stuff?" I'm just like, I don't know. It's what I like, and yeah, I discovered I'd heard of Toad, but I didn't really know anything about them until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I started listening to some of like Walk on the Ocean, some of the earlier hits. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then I discovered Dulcinea, and I listened to that whole album like a million times. I was like, this is amazing. And then Coil, and then New Constellation, and I don't know, Glenn Phillips' voice is just so like Adams in the sense that it's just very poetic and very soothing. It's obviously nothing like Adams' voice, but it's his own very specific voice that you hear it and you go, "That's Glenn Phillips," or you hear Adams' voice, "Oh, that's Adam Duritz." So there's just something about that band. I love their songwriting and I love the messages in their songs. And you said, Eric, they played 10 songs. I knew all 10 songs.
Oh, that's great.
Was pretty cool.
I know it's funny because I think he grew up Jewish if I remember correctly. I say this because in some ways I don't know, something about the overall like message and spirituality of the band reminds me of like almost Christian rock if it was like just something about the right. I don't know. It always escaped me, even though it's obviously not. Yeah, I said I think I even texted Zephry that I said I think Adam has more range and can do more creative things with his vocal, might be more talented in some ways or worked on it. But if I could have the voice of any singer of the last 50 years, I'd actually choose Glenn Phillips. Like I'm very jealous of his singing voice. I can't explain it. I said something to Zephry which surprised me. Because I don't think I have too much else to say about Toad, except that one of the things I was going to say about this, which I told Chris and Jeff, that I enjoyed the concert. I didn't have as good seats as I had before, and the crowd around me wasn't as good. And there were a couple of jerks near me, and there's like two different types of jerk. One guy was a kind of, I think, fairly well-to-do jerk, about my age, behind me with his wife. And the funny thing was, he liked. I just love it. I mean, by the way, they were super drunk, so I hadn't been in a show with that many drunk people for Crows, and I don't know, maybe like 10 or 15 years. So that was part of it. It was kind of, at least around me, it was a drunk scene. But that guy was funny because, and I told Zephry, surprisingly, people don't realize about about Toad, given how like kind of, I don't know how to describe Glenn, but very gentle, soft, right? Kind of, I don't even know, maybe even somewhat feminine in some ways. I don't know, or a feminized masculine guy. Is that they were kind of popular with like frat boys, just like Dave Matthews was. It was, but in that genre, which is surprising because now I wouldn't see that. So the guy behind me was like complaining about all their songs, but he's like, "Play beep beep beep, Walk on the Ocean. That's what I want." I'm just laughing at like he's not seeing the irony of his frat boy attitude towards Glenn Phillips and their songs, right? And play the hits. Well, he was playing the hits, but
the whole show.
Yeah, the whole show was the hit. So, but anyway, that's my thought on Toad and Zephry. Before we move on, the one thing I had as a little side note is that speaking of bands that you either adjacent to the Crows, I guess I want to say, is that I was explaining to Zephry right before we tailgated for a little bit, and right before the show, I explained who Big Star was. And I said I did not know them at all until actually Underwater Sunshine and the Ballad of El Goodo. And he was like, "Oh, that's kind of neat." And he's like, "Oh, I hadn't heard." And I said, "Yeah, every so often you even see somebody with a Big Star logo on their shirt. We walk in the front gate and right there with a guy holding like 2 beers. And he's like, "I got into them because of the Crows."
It was instant too. We like walked right in. You're like, hey, look at
So
that guy's shirt.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, Rich, being from the generation, do you have any thoughts on either Toad or Big Star? I mean, Big
I
Star.
feel like I haven't caught up. I liked Toad when it was back and those albums came out, and I just kind of lost touch with them. We're gonna have to reconnect again.
Yeah, the Coil album, which some people say is their best, but it made me think about the Crows a lot actually, because the only difference is the Crows, their first album was a huge hit, and Toad, it took them a couple. Maybe I'll look up how many albums they sold. It's more than you think. But when Coil came out, it was almost like I, I don't even know the equivalent. Maybe it's their equivalent of recovering the satellites, in that they wanted it to be harder. It just didn't have the hit single like Long December. But I guess besides that, recovering didn't have. But I think, but it didn't do as well as maybe they thought it was going to do, and that can cause a band to break up, even if it sold quite a number. And I have thought that sometimes about like Crows, like the Hard Candy, for example, didn't sell a ton of albums, and I thought, oh, maybe they'll break up. By the way, it also, Chris, got me thinking. We talk about the greatest hits, and we'll talk about this Hard Candy. The Crows are playing the greatest hits. They're playing all their singles. Maybe not Daylight's Fading. You know what they're not playing is American Girls,
Never.
Haven't played that in
For the
forever.
longest time.
which is their
Yeah.
single, their hit single in quotes from Hard Candy. So
Although Big Yellow Taxi was, I mean,
that's true.
that was really the gigantic single, weirdly, from that record. I actually thought, though, two things, but if you asked about like Big Star,
Yeah.
Star rules, everyone should go listen to Big Star. There's not that much of it to listen to. Like, it's not that hard to listen to the entire discography of the band.
Right.
So it's worth an hour or two. But I do
Okay.
think it was one of the interesting things that like the criticism of the Crows this summer was that, oh, they're playing like the greatest hits, and I'm like, are they? I mean, yes, they're playing like Mr. Jones and Round Here. They're playing Hanging Around. They're like hitting some of the singles, but they're not playing Accidentally in Love. They played Big Yellow Taxi sometimes. Weren't playing American Girls. I mean, I think a lot of it is just they were playing what the songs that are kind of the bedrocks of their shows, hits or not, right? I mean, like Omaha is not really a hit, but like it's a bedrock song for them. They played it a lot this summer, so it felt more to me like they were playing like maybe like a best of, right? Like here's the sort of essence of the Crows in concert, kind of stuff, and not really. It wasn't really about the fact that they were the hits, but so much as the like these are kind of the songs that are again are big, are classic concert songs.
No, that's right. All right. So before we move on from Toad, I'll just give the fun facts about it, because I didn't realize it, because some of these were slow burner albums, kind of like August was. But Fear and Dulcinea both did go platinum. But Fear, again, because it was kind of a slow burner album with All I Want and stuff, were only top 50. But Coil, debuted in the top 20, but didn't go gold, and that was enough to break them up. Basically, I think is what happened. So
Interesting.
it's just
Some
interesting
really good
how the
songs on that album.
standards, how the standards can really change, and now they're staying together and producing new albums, even though they're not selling really any at all, right, compared to back then. So it's interesting how we change as we get older. Okay, so let's talk about the actual concert itself. I mean, it's not too much different, the set list, from the other ones. I do have a couple side. Again, Chris, like you predicted, they did start with Sullivan Street as a tribute to me.
Yeah, a thank you to whoever in the band's team, probably not the band themselves, but whoever in the band's team is a listener and keeps suggesting that they open with Sullivan Street when we're in the crowd.
Here's another. Just like for those of you that actually made it all the way to this podcast, through this podcast episode, just like I declared August 1st to be Counting Crows Day, we must always acknowledge it as such. The official. So I noticed that Chris had a Recovering the Satellites T-shirt on today.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say Recovering Satellites, but it's a shooting star.
No, but it's a logo from the
and Zephry has that. I bought it last year. I talked to somebody this year at the concert who had this. And I'll mention that in a second. But I'm officially declaring now the shooting star to be the T-shirt of the hardcore fan. So, like, if you like, that's an opening. If someone's wearing the shooting star shirt at a concert, you are allowed to go up and talk to them. You're either a fan of the podcast or. And I went to. It was ironic. It was actually Zephry, the concert. I don't know if you listened to the episode, but the concert I met you, I also met Zubia and her daughters, and I interviewed them on a podcast episode. This one, I actually, on the way to the bathroom, saw two women in shooting star shirts, said hi, we talked. It was another woman and her daughter, about the same age. But again, she kind of convinced her daughter, introduced the Crows to them, and now they both love them. So yeah, we talked about we talked about the shooting star shirt. All right,
it's a good logo, and the 90s are in, guys. The 90s are very in right now. I saw a band recently open for the Gaslight Anthem that was really doing, like, going deep into the 90s stuff, and I was including crowd surfing. And it's just like, yeah, the 90s are back in, which means that the 90s Counting Crows logos are in, which means get out your shooting stars.
Exactly. I'm not going to talk about every song on the set list. You can pick it when you want. I did mention in the beginning I was a little worried because I have a feeling, I could be wrong, Zephry, I thought he was a little sick. I think he kind of got over it near the end. I think I looked up that they had played 3 out of either something ridiculous, like 4 out of 6 nights. Definitely they played the night before in San Diego, I know for a fact, because I met some people that went there. I just thinking, when you get near the end of that show too, maybe his body was starting to break down a bit. Even in the second song, was it St. Robinson? He actually screwed up the lyrics a little bit in the beginning. He also, correct me if I'm wrong, there's only 2 videos on YouTube. There's a Washington Square, which I thought was great, and him doing the one. But he's basically wearing pajama pants, right?
Yeah, they were like those purple striped. It almost looked like if the Joker was wearing bell bottoms. That's pretty much what it was.
I think they were pajama pants. So pajama.
No, I think they were structured. I think he was just going very like 60s mod. I think I've seen this, but yeah.
Okay, because part of me was like, maybe he's been in bed, doesn't feel good. But as the show progressed, I mean, they were fine. I was just a little worried in the beginning that maybe he wasn't feeling it. And then they played Mr. Jones, the Colorblind, the Butterfly in Reverse, which we've talked about. We like, but they played a lot. Zephry or
I want to point out a math thing here with Butterfly in Reverse. I made a joke earlier. They played it 78 times. That's incorrect. They've played it 132.
Yeah,
according to Setlist FM, which now makes it it's surpassed a number of the songs on Hard Candy. It is now it's now like 5th from the bottom, which is it's if they play it next summer, it's going to catch a bunch of things.
I wonder if it's because he considers it one of his most beautiful songs.
He said his girlfriend said that.
His girlfriend liked it. And she said to play it, and now he wants to play it all the time, and he forgot about it. It's kind of the same thing that he said about Monkey, right? Oh, we forgot about this. We didn't play it in the last tour.
I'd rather hear Monkey.
Yeah, and it is maybe it's not as bitter as the other one. I don't know. It's probably, but he said he likes singing it. So
yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. But I noticed when they played that song, everybody sat down. Like everyone was standing the whole time, that was like the 4th song or whatever.
Right, because they had a fairly casual, and that's kind of my point of that crowd. It was more of the drunk. We know the hits. It definitely was not. I don't know.
Packed
when they played that song in England, for example, nobody was sitting down. They just like went with all the songs, and they liked it.
Can you guys describe the venue for me? Because it's labeled the Orange County Fair, and so I asked Eric before the show like what he was going to eat. Like he was going to eat like a hamburger on a donut or something like that. Fried butter. And he's like, the fair's been over. The fair's not happening.
Well, Chris, it's kind of
what's the venue like?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Greek Theater a little bit. It's like an outdoor theater. It's not I guess it's called the Pacific Amphitheater, but I think of an amphitheater like you've got the indoor thing, the cover, and then the lawn. Although, Eric, I think you said, or somebody said, that it used to have lawn. At the very, very back, there's some grass, and apparently back in the day, that was lawn. There was
I don't think I said that, but I think somebody had told me that as well.
I ran into a person that I had a show with one of my bands last weekend, and they said that they know people who knows Adam, and he said 20 years ago, this guy was backstage at the Pacific Amphitheater talking with Adam and some other people. I thought that was kind of interesting. And he said back then that place held about 10,000, and now it's like 8 because they got rid of that grass seating or whatever. So it's a really cool place, and it was packed. I looked around a couple times, and so casual drunk fans or not, it was packed.
It was absolutely packed. I mean, Chris, it's so weird because I've gone to now 4. Well, I guess it's the only time I've only been to 4 shows in the LA Metro. They were all in the last 16 months. So I saw the Troubadour show. I saw them at the casino here locally. I saw them in LA at the YouTube Theater where I met Zephry, and now in Costa Mesa, which is Orange County, which is a little different, right? You get the, I guess you'd call it inner suburbs and the rich, OC, I don't know, housewives of OC, whatever. The crowds were so different. I mean, the Troubadour show was handful of hardcore fans mixed with music execs and sales reps and friends of the band. And then the casino show was very quiet but very attentive. Like there were people that maybe didn't know, and surprisingly not drunk for a casino. It was almost all these people that got free tickets, and they were watching it like you would watch a Broadway show. They were watching very intently and hanging on every word, but it didn't feel like a concert in some ways. But it was great when they were playing Angels of the Silence acoustic and Ballad of El Gudo, where you could catch every note, and it felt so. Even though I wasn't that close to the stage, I guess moderately close, it still felt intimate. And then the YouTube theater show, I don't know, that was a good crowd too. I don't know. I thought the YouTube theater was good, and it was indoors, of course, and a little less drunk. And this was more out. This was an outdoor show, which is one thing that is a little different. One guy told me too, and I'll say there somebody had been to the show before. I didn't catch it, but he said one of the problems was that he thought the mix was really bad, that somebody was messing it up. I didn't catch that, but yeah, and somebody said it on the way out too. So I heard two people say it. So anyway, I'm not close enough to catch that. So then they did Omaha. So Zephry, you got your Miami. Zephry asked for Miami, and he got that.
Because I didn't hear it last year when I sat front row, and I wanted to hear that song front row. So someday.
I think I mentioned it, but last year, just to reiterate, Zephry was featured on the Jumbotron last year.
Or so I was told. I don't remember seeing it.
I wanted to take. He wasn't the only one, but they suddenly showcased a couple hard fans that were sitting in the front row last year, and he was one of them. And that was, of course, one of my issues too. I was a little further back, I guess. I thought the highlight, well, not highlight, maybe the highlight because it was they don't play it that often anymore, was Washington Square. I like that song, and I lived in New York, so that meant a lot to me. And they play it.
When he went into, I was listening to the show, when he went into the banter about that, I was assuming he was going to be like, I get to go home soon. He did say something about that, but he did also talk about how like LA is still a home to him because he spent so much time there and lived there.
Yep.
So that was kind of nice that it's like the two homes, Washington, the two places that Washington Square kind of fits.
Yep. Absolutely. Friend of the Devil, which I guess they don't play as much as they used to. I went to them when they were playing it a lot, and I'm like, oh, I've heard this so much, but they don't play it as frequently anymore. It was a good version. So then we get into Big Yellow Taxi, which we found out later replaced Angels of the Silence's acoustic, which is kind of for whatever reason, they were supposed to play Angels of the Silence's acoustic there. They scratched it and added Big Yellow Taxi, which they weren't originally scheduled to play. So
how did you find that out, Eric?
Somebody got a copy of the set list. And the other song was on it. There was, in fact, I was going to say there was another song which was Recovering the Satellites. They totally dropped. So that one they didn't replace, but someone had a copy that they, up in the front, right? Everybody has a copy of the set list. And then sometimes they give it to fans after the show. And those were two things. I'm guessing Recovering the Satellites was dropped because of time. I don't know why they would replace Big Yellow Taxi with Angels, but
I think it's more of a hit probably for that crowd, maybe.
Yeah, maybe that was it. So round here, so I'll get Chris. Again, he knows me. I'm not a huge alt. I actually thought this was a pretty good alt of Round Here. Even though I'm not a huge Round Here guy, this was one of the highlights of the show, I thought.
Yeah. Definitely when they go into September, fades into October, November. I like that version. It's kind of feels relatable because it kind of feels like somber, sad, but there's like a hope or something, almost like.
And he was tying into his birthday, right, in August, so he was mentioning August a lot, right, Chris? So that was part of it, I guess.
There's some August I remember, and some August, and some that I just forget.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very. Well, especially I think because you guys, it was the last day of August, right? And you guys saw them,
yeah.
Oh,
and
right.
it's fading into fall, right?
Yeah.
We're moving, that every summer fades into September.
Yes.
Nothing more true than that, right? It's like, but very starkly true, and I think it's I think it's got its place among some of the best round here alts. I think what they were doing this summer. That's what I was
And
saying. I think if you were looking at these shows and you're like, okay, that's cool, that's interesting, but like what was really like interesting on sort of the every night was like, what's he going to do in the middle round here?
Yeah.
I think that was really one of the highlights on
I
each
think
show.
it's interesting. It ties back almost to that Long December intro from '99. How
Mm.
he went through month by month, and he's kind of brought that into around here now with this
Mhm.
all.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, Rain King, which I don't remember it being particularly memorable, but of course Rain King I love because no matter what the crowd is, well, especially a crowd like that. A crowd like that actually will get totally energized by Rain King, right? Because they're there for the the hits. They're pretty drunk and they went a little nuts about it. Do you agree, Zephry? That was a good.
Yeah, that's always at the end of the set. It usually comes after. Well, lately it's been. I think it's been coming after Long December. I think where usually they would do the encore of Palisades Park, Rain King, Holiday in Spain. They did that for like 8 years. That exact same encore. It's like, guys, come on. But
They
yeah.
so then we get in the one and long. I guess this is the other time that I'll mention that, like, and again, don't worry, I was not traumatized by this experience, but it made me laugh. Like, I was around all these kind of douchey people. So the guy behind me that was complaining about Toad, but even though he was a Toad fan, but then like next to me when I came back from the bathroom, next to me was so that was kind of like the rich D bag behind me, and then to the left of me was kind of like the working class D bag. Like, so the different kind of D bags from like high school. This guy was like this kind of working class, and then you're gonna love this. He was like, why are you here alone, man? Like, what's wrong with you? You didn't have anybody to bring. And by the way, he's there with his date. Like, you can't. And then I can't keep my
Not for
mouth shut, so
long.
I said a couple of lines to him too. But was fun. But then next to me was the good drunk people. They were totally drunk, but they loved me. For some reason, they got really into. They were the opposite, right? He thought I was weird, and he was kind of making fun of me, and they thought I was really cool that I was there by myself, and they were asking all these questions. But by the way, the one in between set lists, not a bad idea. This one girl brought 80s trivia and wanted to play it with people around her in the stands, which was
Wow.
not bad. And I
Yeah,
did
that's
pretty
fun.
good. So she was impressed by that. But here's this is hilarious. So the one of the women next to me thought I was the coolest person until she still thought I was cool. But what actually, because then when she was asking about the crows, oh, you like them so much, you've been to a lot. When I said that I had a podcast, she was like, oh, well, that's a little bit intense. So so that cracked me up. So that was like she was impressed by my nerd scale until I said the podcast. That was a little too much for her. So,
It's just a
but
podcast. It's not a
I
shrine.
don't know. I guess she thought, don't you have anything better to do? But the one thing that made me laugh is the guy next to me who was, I said the kind of the blue collar douchebag. He, one thing interesting comment because he only got into the 4 or 5 songs that were hits. The other ones he was either texting people or fighting with his girlfriend. But when they were playing the one, he was like, "Oh, I know this is going to lead to Long December," but it was interesting. He was like, "This must be one of their new singles." So
Oh,
he thought
good.
the one, yeah, I thought that was interesting. So anyway, I love the one. You know, it's the fan favorite. He'll probably be doing that for a couple more years, going
Yeah,
into
it's
Long
good though. I
December.
like it.
It's a great addition
It's
to the
great. It's
repertoire.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And he really does sound like it's coming out of Adam's voice.
Yeah.
yeah. And Chris, I'd have to go back because I'm not 100% sure. Because one thing we talked about offline was I think he was part of it by not much, but I think this year, Zephry, you correct me if I'm wrong, Dan is adding a little more to the one.
Yeah,
He
there's a
was
few
standing there
shows.
last time, but a little more guitar and a little more vocals. And I think last
Yeah.
year he added less.
And I think Charlie's playing accordion and
Yeah, he did that both years though, so he was
oh,
always
okay. And I think was Emmy playing mandolin too? I think they started adding more of the band members to spice up
yeah.
some of the things.
That I'm not sure about. Maybe, yeah, I
But I
could
know
call, but
Dan
that
has been singing harmonies and playing some little licks and stuff.
yeah. So that was great into Long December. Now, Long December, of course, was fairly normal, except I've mentioned it briefly on the podcast once, but I'm glad that Zephry knew it. I go nuts when they add that extra 30 seconds at the end. Do you know what I'm talking about, Chris? When they, na na na, yes. And then they kind of stopped and then they
Yeah.
jam out for that. And then he's like, hit it, Jim. And they do that extra 30 seconds. I don't know why I could listen to that 30 seconds all. It reminds me of the
It's
last part of All My
so great.
Friends.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's great.
They should play that. It's just like ending some of those other ones. I'm like, that should be every time, no matter what. But anyway,
But I think
then it
that's what
wouldn't be
makes it so
special.
special. Yeah, exactly.
that's
That's what
true.
makes it special.
That's
But
true.
and you and I probably knew it was coming when he was holding the
Oh yeah,
chord at the end and was doing those like quarter notes. I'm like, oh, I know it's coming. Like
yeah, and I
he's
couldn't
gonna do
believe
it.
it because I thought he kind of had retired that because he definitely did not do it at all last year. That I know for a fact. Did not do it in 2023. So I thought that was kind of retired. And that's it. And then hanging around in Holiday in Spain. Anybody, Chris or Zephry, any other just comments about the concert at all?
Yeah, it was just great. I mean, I hadn't seen him in a year at that point. I wasn't really Santana's fine, but I didn't really want to see the Crows as an opener, so I didn't go to the Forum show. And when I saw back in February when I bought these tickets that Toad was going to be opening for the Crows, I was like, well, that sounds amazing. So, and it lived up to exactly what I thought it would because I saw them at the same Pacific Amphitheater 2 years ago, and they played fine, but something just felt really kind of rushed about their set. And I remember walking out like when the show was done, not walking out. So the people next to me left after 5 songs. They were like, "This sucks. I'm out of here." I'm like, "Okay, wow, that's interesting." But I remember when I was leaving, somebody next to me was like, "That was the worst concert I've ever been to." Like they actually said that, and I was like, "Wow, that's a little intense." But they played fine, but it just didn't have that passion. It felt like kind of just I don't know, something was off that night. And maybe, because they're so creative and emotional that they can't bring it 100% every time. So, but I thought this time, and when I saw them at the YouTube theater, they were phenomenal. So it was just, that was interesting to have that experience.
Great. Yeah, I will say that, and I usually only talk. I mean, except for people around me, I only maybe every show, maybe I'll talk to 5 fans. I will say, Chris, that so far I've never had anyone actually know of the podcast, right? And most people have been they're like, "Wow, podcast just about the Crows." There's only yeah, they've always been very positive reactions. Like one right away, like looked it up, like, "Oh, this is such a great idea! Yeah, you're doing the right thing." There's the only one that was weird, and I think she was kind of drunk. Was this older fan that she had a Troubadour show, and then I said something, and then she's like, "You need me on, like one of the you should have me on. I'm the biggest fan." Like I'm like, okay, great. Like you didn't sell yourself. And then the
Yeah.
husband's like, "Yeah, she's a big fan." So
Or what about you said some guy was going to start his own Crows podcast? You said you met
yeah, well,
somebody,
that was
Eric?
last. Yeah, that was last. We've talked about that before, but yeah, there's
Okay.
somebody else that had tried. They last. Yeah, as far as I know,
Got last in.
that is defunct.
Yeah.
I did
Big
meet.
commitment.
I'm not going to mention any name or detail. I did, even though I tried to recruit people to listen. I met somebody at the end who I think, as I was kind of waiting for the crowd to die down near the entrance, who I think knows. Let's just say I'm very positive knows Adam very well, a close friend, and then his wife was kind of trying to take him away. But even I just, it was so weird because I'm usually very outgoing, but I couldn't cross that line in that situation. Not cross the line, sorry. I decided not to bring up the podcast, even though a little bit I either wanted to talk about, just randomly ask a couple questions like, "Oh, you know Adam from this, what about this?" Or even just mention the podcast. But to me, I was like, yeah, I don't want to come across as whatever, at least at this point, too stalkery. So I just, said have a great night and left it at that. But so anyway, so Chris, any other thoughts about, and then we'll go to Rich, but any other thoughts about our closing things about the podcast at all, the tour, anything?
Well, a couple of tour notes, right? And for those who are kind of following along, they did introduce into the sets in the last run of shows a few songs. So we talked like last time about how relatively few songs had been in the mix. They added God of Ocean Tides, Black and Blue, and Good Time towards the end, and did mix it up again. They added some interesting other stuff too. Although they opened a lot of the last run of shows with Hard Candy and Richard Manuel back to back. Like at least 3 or 4 shows they went with that as the opening too. Also interestingly, so I think we noted last time that Carl Perazzo from Santana's band had been playing up with them on Hanging Around. One time, that San Diego show the night before, Santana came out and played guitar. Carlos Santana played guitar with them on Hanging Around, and that is worth listening to. Carlos Santana, I don't know if you've heard this, guys, very good at guitar. Very, very good.
Very famous, right?
Fairly famous for playing guitar.
Something else entirely.
Yeah.
With Santana on lead guitar, and that version is worth listening to. Adam yells out, "Hey, Dad!" in the middle of it. It was really funny.
I asked Zephry. We were talking about the show that we would have went to with the opening would have been at the Kia Forum, I guess it's called, right?
Mm.
Which again, if we had this other choice, I wrote on Reddit like how was the crowd, and someone wrote they were all there for Santana, but they cheered very loud for the Crows, which was great. By the way, the Costa Mesa show, Zephry, I think people have commented. There was one other person that said most people were very positive about the Costa Mesa show, and I generally was too. But there was one other person that said, like, I didn't write anything about my experience, but somebody else complained about the drunk. They just said, oh, these were just people, I don't know, the yacht rock crowd that were just there to drink their wine.
Came in from Newport or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine if they're talking the whole time, it just ruins the show.
It does.
Infuriating.
It had a mix. But Rich, any other thoughts? Closing thoughts as we wrap up the episode?
No, you guys covered it really well. Just really appreciate it. It's an honor to join you today. Thank you.
Great, and we appreciate hearing your story, and we're glad you got to make it to the show, because it would have broke your heart, I guess, to miss one of their classic shows because you didn't know that they were going to record their bootleg from it and stuff. So, all right,
that's great.
And hopefully you did eventually find your wallet.
Yeah,
it was gone. It was taken. Life lesson that day: don't run in, leave the car unlocked with your wallet just hanging out in the middle. But it's a wallet. Worst things in life. Got over it.
You got to the show, and that's really
there you go.
That's
and
worth
you got
more than however much cash was in your wallet at the time.
And who would have known? 25 years later, here I am getting to talk to you all about it. It's great.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, for Zephry, Rich, and Chris, I thank you for listening, and look forward to seeing you down here on Sullivan Street. Goodbye.